This is Mario Amir Lawson, and you are watching the Federative Republic of Brazil Country Profile, Background in History. Here is the shape of the country, made out of the Bandeira do Brasil, which is the Brazilian flag. It has a blue disc depicting the starry sky above Rio, spanned by a curved band inscribed with the national motto, Ordem e Progresso, Order and Progress, within a yellow rhombus on a green field. The design is mostly from the Portuguese Empire, except there are 27 stars for the 26 states and one federal district. Right now you are listening to the Hino Nacional Brasileiro, the Brazilian national anthem. According to scientists and historians, people were in Brazil as long as 8,000 years ago. The Portuguese were the first European settlers. Pedro Cabral accidentally landed in South America when sailing for India. You might say he was way off course. In the 1500s, he began colonizing Brazil. Even according to the Portuguese reports, there were natives already living there. These natives numbered around 7 million. They were of the Arawak, Tupi, and Tupua tribes. Mostly agricultural tribes, some were hunter-gatherers, and others were, yes, cannibals. Each village had an average of about 3,000 to 5,000 inhabitants, and they lived in temporary dwellings. Most of the tribes only had limited agriculture, so tribal warfare and cannibalism were rampant. Today, only 200,000 of the indigenous tribes have survived. Most live in the jungles. After Cabral, the dominant settlers were impoverished sailors and tradesmen, and most of the country's interior remained unexplored for years. Eventually, the population can be divided into two sections: agricultural settlements, which cultivated and lived off the land, and semi-nomadic people who moved around to find suitable food and water. These early societies hunted, fished, and grew their own goods to survive. The farming folk lived to the west of the Andes mountain range and eventually became urbanized over time. The semi-nomadic travelers lived to the east of these mountains. Neither of the civilizations developed a significant written form of history or any major buildings. Therefore, little is known about Brazil's earliest inhabitants. Individual indigenous tribes and settlements numbered around 2,000 when the Portuguese first landed in Brazil. When these Europeans arrived in the 16th century, they found themselves amidst a people that were considered savage, a people who would fight for the Brazil word tree and for its valuable red dye. Therefore, these new arrivals felt it was necessary to civilize the natives. They also immediately began to indulge in sexual relations, creating a very mixed culture, which remains one of the characteristics of the country to this day. These settlers brought with them many diseases from Europe, which wiped out a vast number of Brazilian natives. Although unintentional, this was responsible for the deaths of entire tribes as they swept through the country uncontrolled and untreated. When gold was found in Brazil in the 1960s, this country was finally recognized for its mineral and trading potential. Approximately a century later, though, it was clear that the gold deposits were limited and that the agricultural value of this country remained its main asset. Culture and society. Brazil has 209 million people, which is the fifth largest population in the world. Cultural life appears to have been richly developed, emanating from a varied mix of cultures. This includes a rich tapestry in folk traditions, music, dance, art, and literature. Brazil has the largest number of Catholics in the world, the main religion since the 16th century. The pau do Brazil was the only item of value discovered when the Portuguese landed, so they started importing and exporting sugar. Then, 19th century coffee production took the place of sugar as Brazil's most important product, and coffee production brought a wave of almost 1 million European immigrants, mostly Italians. Since the Portuguese primarily started the Atlantic slave trade, more than 41% of the enslaved were shipped to Brazil, compared to the 50% shipped to the Caribbean and the 5% that were shipped to the US. Brazil's population is intermingled to a degree that is unseen elsewhere. Most Brazilians possess some combination of European, African, Amerindian, Asian, and Middle Eastern lineage, and this multiplicity of cultural legacies is a notable feature of current Brazilian culture. Even though Brazil has the fifth largest population in the world, because of its size there are only 15 people per square kilometer, concentrated mainly along the coast and in major cities, where 2/3 of the people now live. Over 19 million in Greater Sao Paulo and 10 million in Greater Rio. The immigrant Portuguese language was greatly influenced by the numerous Indian and African dialects they encountered, but it remains the dominant language in Brazil today. In fact, the Brazilian dialect has become the dominant influence in the development of the Portuguese language, for the simple reason that Brazil has 15 times the population of Portugal and a much more dynamic linguistic environment. Today, Brazilians show amazing resilience even under political and economic stress. Popular foods include barbecue meats, which competes with Argentina. Moquesca, it's a fish stew. Cachaça, it's sugar and cane juice. Brigadeiros, it's like chocolate truffles. Pão de queijo, cheese bread. Quindam, flan or a sweet egg treat. Feijoada, black beans, sausage, and pork stew. Cocina, deep-fried minced chicken wrapped in dough and molded in the shape of a chicken leg, and fried beer bar snacks. They have Oktoberfest of Blumenau, which is a German festival celebrated in mid-October. Cirio de Nazaré, which is the Catholic festival in Belém that honors Our Lady of Nazareth. Carnaval, which dates back to the 18th century in Brazil. It was spurred on by blocos, local dancers who dressed in costumes with special designed t-shirts. And they were generally around samba schools, and samba schools were said to be the epicenter of Brazilian Carnaval. Government holidays include January 1st, which is New Year's Day. April 21st was Tiradentes, the anniversary of Joaquim José da Silva Xavier, a national martyr who led the revolutionary attempt to gain independence in 1789. They have Easter Sunday and Good Friday. In some parts of Brazil, Easter is celebrated in autumn, though. May 1st is Work Day, September 7th is Independence Day, October 12th is Children's Day, and November 2nd, the Day of the Dead. Also, they have November 15th, which is Republic Proclamation Day. That's the day when they claimed their independence from imperial rule. Then they have Christmas on December 25th. Renowned for dance, Brazil is known for the bossa nova and the samba. Brazilians are also known for participating in capoeira, which is a mixture of martial arts and dance. Government and politics. Lisbon's early goals were simple: monopolize the lucrative trade of the pau-brasil, the red dye wood, and establish permanent settlements. But lack of labor made pau-brasil trade less desirable. So the interest in establishing plantations on cleared lands increased. The Portuguese tried to enslave Indians, but many natives either fled far inland or died. Then they turned to the African slave trade for their workforce. Most settlers preferred the coastal areas, but a few ventured into the hinterlands, like the Jesuit missionaries, determined men who marched inland in search of Indian souls to save, and the infamous bandeirantes, flag bearers, who were tough men that marched inland in search of Indians to enslave. Later, they hunted escaped Indians and African slaves. For 2 centuries, the Portuguese had to periodically deal with foreign powers with designs on Brazil's resources. Although Portugal and Spain had a treaty in 1494 which set boundaries for each country in the newly discovered lands, the guidelines were vague, causing the occasional territory dispute. Furthermore, England, France, and Holland didn't fully recognize the treaty, which was made by papal decree, and they were aggressively seeking new lands in pirate-ridden seas. The new territory faced several challenges, and the Portuguese crown couldn't establish a strong central government. For much of the colonial period, it relied on captains, low-ranking nobles and merchants who were granted authority over captaincies, which were slices of land often as big as their motherland. Most of the original 15 colonies fell by 1549, so Portugal's monarch dispatched a governor-general to establish a capital, today Salvador, in the central captaincy of Bahia. At the end of the 17th century, the news that fabulous veins of emeralds, diamonds, and gold had been found in Minas Gerais exploded in Lisbon. The region began to export 30,000 pounds of gold a year to Portugal. Bandeirantes and other fortune hunters rushed in from all over, and boatloads of carpenters, stonemasons, sculptors, and painters came from Europe to build cities in Brazil. In 1763, the capital was moved to Rio de Janeiro. At this time, the country had successfully staved off invasions by European nations and had roughly taken its current shape. It added cotton and tobacco to sugar, gold, and diamonds on its list of exports. As the interior opened, so did opportunities for cattle ranching. Still, Portugal's policies tended towards stripping Brazil of its resources rather than developing a truly local economy. The arrival of the royal family in 1808 initiated major changes. As Dom João VI arrived in Rio, he began transforming the city and its environs. Building projects were set in motion. Universities as well as a bank and a mint were founded, and investments were made in the arts. The ports were open to trade with other nations, especially England, and morale improved throughout the territory. By 1821, Dom João had returned to Lisbon and left his son Dom Pedro I in charge of Brazil. When the king attempted the following year to return to Brazil to subordinate status as a colony, Dom Pedro flourished his sword and declared, "This country is independent from Portugal," and his independence from his father. Dom Pedro I then established the Brazilian Empire. 9 years later, following a period of internal unrest and costly foreign wars, the emperor stepped down in favor of his 5-year-old son, Pedro II. Regents ruled until 1840, when the second Pedro was 14 and Parliament decreed him of age. Pedro II's daughter, Princess Isabel, officially ended slavery in 1888. Soon after, disgruntled landowners united with the military to finish with monarchy altogether. They forced the royal family back to Portugal and founded Brazil's first republican government on November 5, 1889. The coffee planters virtually owned the country and the government for the next 30 years until the worldwide depression evaporated coffee demand. For the next half a century, Brazil struggled with governmental instability, military coups, and a fragile economy. In 1989, the country enjoyed its first democratic election in almost 3 decades. Unfortunately, the Brazilians made the mistake of electing Fernando Collor de Mello, Meio's corruption did nothing to help the economy. In March 1990, Fernando Collor de Mello took office and was soon ousted in December 1992. Brazil's leadership fell to Vice President Itamar Franco. With his Plano Real, Franco brought inflation under control. In 1994, Franco was replaced by Fernando Henrique Cardoso. Cardoso brought about relative economic stability, but at the price of recession, cuts in health and educational programs, and a soaring national debt. More corruption. By 1999, Cardoso's popularity was at a record low, causing nationwide calls for his resignation. Then comes Lulu, Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva. He was considered the greatest president for the economy, followed by Dilma Rousseff, the first woman president elected in 2011. She was impeached in 2016 due to a corruption scandal with Petrobras. It was called Operation Car Wash. Several businesses and members of government were investigated for bribery, collusion, including Dilma Rousseff and Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva. They investigated about 232 people, arrested 160 people, 16 companies were involved, and 93 people were convicted. Michel Temer, who was Rousseff's vice president and the current president, was then impeached for his involvement as an aide under Rousseff's presidency. Today's most excellent president of the republic is Jair Messias Bolsonaro. He has a vice president and a cabinet of ministers. The country also has a general of the union, a national defense council, and several federal institutions. The legislative branch consists of the federal senate, the chamber of deputies, and the court of accounts of the union. Their laws consist of the constitution, anti-discrimination laws, human rights laws, and LGBT rights. And they have administrative divisions with 26 states, 5 regions, state governors, state senators, and municipalities. Commerce and economy. Even though Brazil is the 22nd largest export economy in the world and the 37th most complex economy according to the Economic Complexity Index, it is not one of the 15th wealthiest countries in the world as measured by GDP per capita. They are all in the Northern Hemisphere. The currency unit is the Brazilian real. The real is about 27 cents to the US dollar. Their GDP is about 2.056 trillion USD in 2017. In 2017, Brazil exported 219 billion and imported 140 billion, resulting in a positive trade balance of $78.3 billion. Since they import and export products from all over the world, the GDP per capita was 15.5 thousand. The top exports of Brazil are soybeans, iron ore, crude petroleum, raw sugar, and cars. Its top imports are refined petroleum, vehicle parts, packaged medicaments, integrated circuits, and, of course, cars. The top import destinations of Brazil are China, the United States, Argentina, the Netherlands, and Germany. The top export origins are China, the United States, Argentina, Germany, and South Korea. Even though the Brazilian borders are Argentina, Bolivia, Colombia, Guyana, Peru, Paraguay, Suriname, Uruguay, and Venezuela, Brazil manages a $350 million peacekeeping mission in Haiti and make in-kind contributions of about $300 million to the World Food Program, which is in addition to the humanitarian assistance and contributions to multilateral development agencies. Climate and geography. Brazil is a tropical country with seasons that are opposite of the Northern Hemisphere because the country is below the equator. It also spans through 3 time zones, much like the US. Its cooler weather is typically found during the winter months of May through September, and the warmer weather is from December to March, which is Brazil's summer. However, within the country are 5 distinct climate regions: equatorial, tropical, semi-arid, highland, tropical, and subtropical. Brazil is the most populous country in the Southern Hemisphere, and is the 3rd country with the most borders in the world. It covers a total area of 3.3 million square miles, about 400,000 square miles smaller than the US. Its capital is Brasilia, and it has 3 different main sections: a coastal section, which had the original 15 colonies, a Cerrado section, which is mostly farmland, and the Amazon section, which is mostly rainforest. In the 5 regions, it has 26 states. The smallest region, which is the South region, has Paraná, Rio Grande do Sul, and Santa Catarina. The next smallest region, the Southwest region, has the states Espírito Santo, Minas Gerais, Rio de Janeiro, and Sao Paulo. The Northeast region has the states Alagoas, Bahia, Ceará, Maranhão, Paraíba, Pernambuco, Piauí, Rio Grande do Norte, and Sergipe. The Central West region has the states Federal District, Goiás, Mato Grosso, and Mato Grosso do Sul. The largest region, the North region, has the states Acre, Amapá, Amazonas, Pará, Rondônia, Roraima, and Tocantins. Much of the terrain is rainforest with mountains and cliffs, although there are several coastal cities. Average temperature is 73 to 77 degrees respectively, with highs in the 80s and sometimes the 90s. According to Will Smith, this is also part of the reason why the Amazonian rainforest creates enough oxygen to supply the entire human race. partly because the country receives 2 to 10 inches of rain. Part of the rainforest environment is that as the temperature rises, it rains more. The Brazilian cities are still divided by large land masses, cliffs, rainforests, and large woodland areas. The coastal regions are more developed, which is where the population is mostly condensed. Since Brazil has had so much difficulty building a solid infrastructure, there's a lack of direct roads which isolates cities. Some of the tourist attractions are the large peak, Pico de Neblina, which is 9,823 feet. It also has a hand in oxygen production. The Amazon River, which is the second largest river in the world, next to the Nile, but it's the first by volume. Christ the Redeemer, which is on Corvocado Peak, is the largest statue of design in this world. And Ipanema Beach, which was made popular by the song The Girl from Ipanema. Copacabana Beach, which is not the famous place we know in the movie. That's in Cuba. The La Jolla neighborhood, which is the third most expensive neighborhood in all of South America. The Botanical Gardens. The Maracana Football Stadium. The Lapa neighborhood, which was once the Red Light District. It has architecture and art from the 1800s and is now lined with several nightclubs. And of course, I wouldn't call it a tourist attraction, but the favelas. They're the Brazilian slums that are full of drug dealers and corrupt police officers. Yet today, officials have been diligently working to clean up the crime and corruption while rebuilding the community. You know what time it is, folks. That's right. It's time for more Doc Rio TV. This is Mario Lawson, and welcome back to Rio's Real Talk. What are we going to talk about today? Brazilian media. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. History is often written by those who control the power. And until 1808, the press was not allowed in Brazil. When the Portuguese royal family arrived in the country, that quickly changed. The Portuguese colony was a special case because all of the European colonies in America had press presence since the 16th century. The first newspaper in Brazil was published in 1808 in Rio de Janeiro on September 10th. These papers were started by wealthy landowners, coffee growers, the military, and political leaders. Throughout history, Brasileiro has been consistently riddled with corruption and government instability. Therefore, the initial use for media was to circulate political propaganda. That is somewhat still the case today. Newspapers, radio stations, and television stations currently remain under the control and influence of 6 Brazilian families. Fortunately, statistics show that Brazilian use of WhatsApp and Facebook is still on the rise, but only 50% of the entire population has access to the internet, so television continues to dominate the market. Media giants like Globo intentionally portray inaccurate views of Afro-Brazilians. However, Black Brazilians make up the majority of the population, and the majority of Black Brazilians live in the favelas. Brazilian media barons drive most of the content in the country. They also openly display their conservative ideologies through fact or fiction. Globo, Abril, and Folha de Sao Paulo are powerhouses. They own most of the influential broadcast and print outlets. Even though these media outlets have been singled out for their selective and strategic coverage of the Rousseff and Temer impeachment stories, accused of trying to use the corruption scandal to unseat a government, and criticized for only portraying an Anglo-Brazilian view. The Global Network presently reaches 99.5% of the potential viewers, which is practically the entire Brazilian population. They have 122 broadcasting stations, 117 affiliates, and they reach 183 million people while delivering programming to over 98.44% of the Brazilian municipalities. Fitting that it all started with barons like Mr. Assis Chateaubriand, a very powerful media tycoon in Brazil from the mid-20s to the late 60s. In the late 40s, his empire had 34 newspapers in different cities, 36 radio stations, and the most important Brazilian national magazine. He decided that he wanted to own a TV station in 1944, and so he visited the RCA facilities in New York as special guest of David Sarnoff. That's right, Sarnoff had a hand in Brazilian television. That's when he decided he wanted to buy one TV station. David Sarnoff sold him 2. One for the city of Sao Paulo and one for the city of Rio de Janeiro, the former capital of Brazil. In 1947, after spending 3 years raising money from various sources, Mr. Chateaubriand placed the order for the equipment. Then something interesting happened. RCA asked Chateaubriand to pay, but to wait some time more for the delivery of the equipment. They also wanted him to wait for the right time to build this equipment. The delay cost about 3 years, but it also meant a significant improvement in the broadcasting power of the station. Later, Mr. Chateaubriand said, in 1947, the range of a television signal was of 20 miles. In 1950, a 5-kilowatt transmitter could reach up to 80 miles. More power meant more reach, and for Chateaubriand, that was better than being the first station in Latin America. Mexican TV actually began 18 days before his station, but he was still the first in the Southern Hemisphere. On September 18, 1950, his Sao Paulo TV station, PRFN TV Tupi Channel 3, was officially inaugurated. Unfortunately, the event was widely boycotted by the press, with the newspapers not even mentioning it, except the ones owned by Chateaubriand. Both his newspapers and his magazine promoted the advent of television in Brazil. In 1955, 6 stations were on the air in Brazil, 3 in Sao Paulo, 2 in Rio, and 1 in the state of Minas Gerais. In 1956, a TV link was established between the states of Rio and Sao Paulo. People in 2 cities could see the same programs, except it was only used on special occasions until the late 1960s. In 1956, 200,000 TV sets were used in the country. Brazil had almost 70 million inhabitants. Estimated TV audience was about 1 million people. 90% of the programs were live staged. Very little was filmed, and that's why almost no recording of the first decade of Brazilian TV exists. Grupo Globo, Brazil's biggest media owner, was the 3rd fastest growing company. Its revenue increased by 15% year on year. The company owns the newspapers O Globo, 12 magazines, 4 radio networks, and public TV network TV Globo. It held exclusive rights to all 64 matches of the FIFA World Cup in 2014 and received another advertising windfall during the broadcasting of the Summer Olympics in Brazil. This type of power has also made them a dangerous opposition. Besides direct government funding, political ownership, and conglomerate investments, Brazil enjoys an international reputation for producing some of the world's most creative advertising. The mere mention of Brazil to advertising professionals evokes images of innovative, appealing print ads and commercials. Many that have taken top prizes at the Cannes Lions International Advertising Festival and other international competitions. This is because there was a revolution that took place in Brazil in the 1980s and 1990s. Certain factors gave rise to a high level of creativity in Brazilian advertising. The advertising venues in Brazil include television, billboards, signs in the streets, magazines, newspapers, and electronic media. Telenovelas, the evening soap operas, along with sporting events, especially soccer, provide some of the most coveted advertising space. Models, as well as producers of advertisements, often achieve celebrity status in Brazil. Gossip magazines report on the private lives of top advertising executives, adding to their celebrity status. And some of Brazil's leading advertisers are similar to those in the U.S. However, the regard with which advertising is held, the public's acceptance of it, and the celebrity status of advertising stars is much, much higher. Companies like Genoma produce packaged medicaments. Via Varejo sell electronics. Unilever Brazil is a vendor of packaged foods, and Banco do Brasil, well, that's the government bank of Brazil. Then there are some well-known U.S. companies like Procter & Gamble, General Motors, Nestle Brazil, and Coca-Cola. As far as advertising agencies are concerned, the advertising agencies in Brazil include 3 major types and are mostly housed in the primary business capital of Brazil, which is Sao Paulo. The first type are the well-known multinational agencies like BBDO, DDB, Draft FCB, Gray, JWT, Leo Burnett, McCann Erickson, Ogilvy, TBWA, Saatchi & Saatchi, and Y&R. These agencies have a strong presence in Brazil and service multinational accounts as well as some local ones. The second type are the smaller, homegrown agencies whose clients are primarily local. And the third one are the small number of extraordinarily successful Brazilian agencies, such as Africa, Almap, DM9, and W Brazil. These firms only grew up in the last few decades, but they do enjoy the distinction of being some of the world's most creative agencies. For Brazilians, online advertising is still growing, but 66% of the population is on Facebook and millions use WhatsApp daily. So advertisers are now creating more online content. Here at Real Talk, we expect to see an influx of Portuguese advertisements on more social media platforms in the near future. Digital terrestrial television was officially adopted by Brazil in 2007, using the ISDB-T international standard, which is a variant of the Japanese ISDB standard, which uses H.264 MPEG-4 AVC for video compression and HEAAC for audio compression, with support for mobile television. The government estimated that it would take 7 years for digital television service to become available across the country, beginning in Greater Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro in 2008. Although most of the conversion was completed by 2018, analog television will be discontinued in phases until 2023. Major Brazilian networks broadcast their digital feeds in 1080i high-definition television, and DTV in Brazil supports interactive television throughout the Ginga platform. Cable television services in Brazil were allowed to start business in 1995. Since then, there were no major advances in the terms of access to technology. As a result of the combination of high prices charged by the providers and reduced purchasing power of most Brazilians, Brazil has one of the lowest number of households with access to cable television. Cable TV in Brazil represents less than 20% of the country's population. Most of the users, 70%, are of the upper class, while the lower class represents 50% of the country's household, and 1% of them have access to cable television. The main paid television providers are Net, which is cable television, Sky, that's satellite television, Claro TV, that's also satellite television, Vivo TV, which is cable, IPTV, which is internet protocol television, and satellite TV, and Oi TV, which is also satellite television. Recent telenovelas, which have had the same basic story sketches since the 1970s, are no longer appealing to younger audiences, so there's been a gradual decline of viewership. They watch American television shows on cable TV or surf the web. While other TV networks face a lack of interest among viewers, one TV network weathered the decline fairly unscathed: Ready Record, who rose its audience by 123% in the last decade, partially due to investments of over $150 million per year. Although Global maintains more than double of Record's average ratings, the latter has been able to surpass Global's audience on specific time slots, such as Sundays and mornings. Surfing the web has surpassed watching TV as the entertainment activity preferred by Brazilians. Other forms of entertainment, such as watching DVDs and viewing cable TV, have also increased their popularity significantly. In 10 years, the number of households with access to cable TV increased by 152%, while the DVD market saw an expansion of 430% in the same period. The number of TV sets not turned on in any free-to-air channels, which indicates that they are being used for either watching DVD or cable TV or playing video games, also increased from 3.5% to 7.7% of the share, surpassing the audience of Record. Cable TV accounted for 4.5% of this, while the remaining 3.2% accounted for watching DVDs and or playing video games. Rede Globo also maintains higher overall ratings because they alone controlled 340 television stations, more than SBT and Rede Record combined together. The National Telecommunications Agency is Anatel, which is a regulatory body that licenses and monitors the use of all broadcast spectrums in Brazil. Initially, radio and television were regulated as a strict public service under the state monopoly. However, Anatel is administratively and financially independent, which means that they are not directly subordinate to any government agency. Its decisions can only be appealed in court from the Ministry of Communications. Unlike other countries, in Brazil there is no clear prohibition against cross-ownership. So the same media groups can hold numerous newspapers, radio stations, and television stations in the same city or state. Thanks for watching Brazilian Media on Real Talk. We'll see you next time.